All right, we are live. Lisa Kuecker, welcome to the future of fitness.
It's a joy to be here.
It's a pleasure. I've been wanting to get you on the show for a while, and it's this is really good timing, right? Q1 2024. You're working on a lot of stuff. You have a lot of great insights from last year, moving into this year, with Studio Grow and your business and all the things you do. Every time I talk to you, I'm like, you do that as well? Like that's bananas. So it's really you're a mover and a shaker, and I'm glad to highlight what you do here on the podcast. So I think a great place to start, Lisa, is you have a really good background, really interesting background. So let's start with that, and then we'll get into all the stuff that you're up to now.
Sure, sure, sure. Well, I mean, background wise, this isn't where I ever expected to land. My first company was a tech company. I started it straight out of college, and benefit to it was I got to see and understand a lot of things that were, I guess, in their very beginnings. We built the front end of mass.gov. At the time, it was the most expensive web portal in the world, and I was a little 20-year-old starting my first company and got the contract and thought, this is insane. And the fact of the matter is I've learned more of understanding how technology and how the web and how our digital presence shaped, because we literally got to build some of the most foundational footprints about how they would be shaped and how people would use them moving forward. Fitness was my passion, my second love, and never expected when I would leave one company that I would have this opportunity, but I fell into fitness haphazardly. I married my husband, landed in Washington State, and an executive from Intel wandered into one of my classes that I was teaching and just said, "Hey, would you want to do something like this inside of Intel?" And that was where my
Oh wow.
first studio was born. Yeah, it was wild. I was probably 24, 25 years old. It was just one of those shocking things, and it gave me an enormous amount of freedom. It was, 2006. It was a time when fitness was really boutique fitness in particular was at its infancy. And it was like a fertile testing ground to say, hey, this model works, this model doesn't work. I didn't have the overhead a traditional studio would have. And I had a ready client source to test with. And we were the strange blend of CrossFit, yoga, and Pilates, because those naturally go hand in hand. But it was proof that even combinations that most people wouldn't expect can be powerful when you interweave them together into the right journey for a client. And you really teach people how they can be utilizing their bodies to its fullest potential. So went onward to open a few facilities. Over the years, I had about 250 studio owners wander through my doors, and my managers were ready to kill me in the process. They were literally like, "We're done. We never want to see this again." And I realized maybe instead of letting people just wander through our doors and learn what we're doing, maybe this is a business. And so at the end of
Mhm.
2015, we started Studio Grow. It was very much like a kitchen table. Hey, we're not going to, this will be a small growth. And in 2016, I sold my facilities. We had all these unsolicited offers in about a 3-month period. And now Studio Grow is a team. We officially hired our 51st employee about 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
Our team owns and operates facilities in the US, Canada, the UK, Europe, the Middle East, across Asia, and in Australia. So in many segments of the world. And I would have never pictured us going there. But here we are. And now we're getting to do some amazing investments back into some incredible concepts in the industry. So it's fun to widen our doors and just see what's possible.
Yeah, fantastic. I we're going to talk a lot about boutique fitness today, and sometimes it strikes me like before you talk about things, you should probably define a thing, right? So when you think of boutique fitness, how do you define that? Because I think a lot of people have different iterations of what it is. So let's start with that, and then we'll dive deeper.
Yeah, I mean, it's a strange thing. This parts of me goes, God, do we have to define boutique and big box? And yet the reality is I think about big boutique being selective towards a single modality or a set of unique modalities under one roof, but rarely having alongside of that what we would call a traditional open gym experience. The boutique fitness world is wide. We see in-home studios, some of which are running 85% profit margins and whose owners are bringing in three to $500,000 a year in net profit. Single modality studios, private studios, small group training studios, group studios, multi-modality studios. Increasingly, we're seeing what I would call a hybrid of medical and boutique fitness that I think is going to be a
Mhm.
broader spectrum of our industry, which is really the wellness center. In the last year, we've probably had more doctors opening facilities than we've ever had. I think we've opened like 6 different doctors facilities, which they're adding in functional medicine, drip therapy, different recovery options. Most of them are former emergency room physicians, ironically, and they're really saying like, what do I do to ensure someone doesn't walk in my doors? So boutique fitness, I think it's a really widespread field, but encompassing that idea that there's an intimacy and a community that does look a little bit different from big box.
Yeah, very interesting. And so you work with studios across 42 countries, right? It's
Yeah.
probably more now, I would
It's
imagine.
and we yeah, we just added 43 and 44. So we're working on we're working into some emerging markets, which has been incredibly excited when you realize that, markets like Pakistan, which we haven't traditionally assumed, they've got Lahore, for example, 11.5 million people. There's opportunities that are really sitting all across the world right now in this. And the fact of the matter is, boutique fitness has really only developed, I would say, a full market in a handful of countries.
And what countries do you think those are? Like full market?
I mean, the US, Canada, Australia,
Okay.
the UK is in development, and I would argue that London is developed, but not the remaining portions of the UK. So, I mean, the US, Canada, Australia, Singapore, Dubai is starting to see that fleshed out on where this is. Abu Dhabi alongside of it, but not quite as much as Dubai. So, parts of the Emirates. So, there's only these handful of places where you're like, wow, the whole spectrum of boutique fitness is there, and I don't want to say it's a saturated market, but it's a market that's fully immersed in boutique fitness. There's a huge amount of opportunities. They've been building big box health clubs all over the world, and the basic fits and mic fits of the world have certainly penetrated a ton of markets. But I think there's a huge opportunity for boutique fitness worldwide. Even though it's established, it's just not as established as it could be.
Yeah, awesome. So I was just at Connected Health and Fitness last month, and a lot of the talk around boutique was headwinds, right? I think, and this is probably just for North America, but I'm sure you'll give us some global insights into it. Stuff like, well, investor dollars are starting to thaw a little bit, but very hesitant, right, in investing in boutique. I think the cost of real estate here in the United States obviously is a tremendous challenge. People are trying to capture like the Gen Z market,
Yeah.
and that was a big point of conversation. And of course, GLP-1, semaglutide, right? Like
Oh,
all these things, like the opportunities and the challenges, Boutique is very unique. So what say you, Lisi? Like when you look at this year, like what challenges, opportunities do you see for 2024 that are maybe different than the past few years? And, given the last 3 years have been bananas,
I would say that, first of all, let's speak to each of these points and then
please.
let me add some of my own. So, on investor dollars that have been relatively tight in the US, I think we can argue that some of the models that really developed early on in boutique fitness that were highly driven by private equity and venture capital weren't necessarily profitable models from day one. In other words, they weren't like a bootstrap model where you really needed to run a 30% EBITDA. You really needed to ensure where that was going. And I think because of that, we've gotten into a dangerous dance of some people thinking this is not the best industry to invest in. In reality, I think the model is continuing to evolve and emerge. And I think one of the biggest things we're going to have to see, especially across the US, is this understanding of what does a sales process and intensive marketing process need to look like. It just doesn't exist in most places. And the idea of the product stacks and pricing that are necessary to really guide people onto long-term consumer relationships. I mean, that's got to change and that's got to shift. And I would say that that's the biggest issue confronting the US right now is that we are light years behind other people in the fitness industry in saying that, you know, sales is a necessary department in every single industry. We've got to take it on. So that's the first piece. Internationally, we're seeing the flip side. Right now, an enormous amount of international investment is going into boutique, and it is interesting because I've sat in a number of these boardrooms around the world in the last 6 months, and one of the conversations I have consistently with international investors is that they don't want what they're seeing out of the US market. They're recognizing that there's some flaws that are there, and they want to know about profitability. They want to know about how we're going to drive revenue. They're asking, to see what our solutions are to these. And I think that that's an interesting tidbit on where that's going and what that's looking like. Cost of real estate, massive issue.
Yeah.
We're seeing two significant issues, and that's going to be the cost of real estate and the ongoing cost of talent. And by talent, I'm not just speaking of who's in front of a classroom or in front of a private lesson. I'm talking about your front desk, your managers, all of these things. We don't necessarily have, well, we have a wide variety of trained and certified instructors and trainers. We have not necessarily built a career path for many of them to have a full-time, lifelong career where they can really feed their family. I can't tell you how many people I talk to, and I realize that when I'm running their payroll, and they're like, I'm making $50 an hour, but when I calculate it out, they're probably making less than their babysitter between travel time, pre-class, after
Ugh.
class, and all of these types of things. So we've got to figure out a different look for what the organizational chart is going to look like. For real estate, we're going to get creative, I think, with smaller and smaller concepts. I see that as the niche concepts, are really going like wildfire. I mean, we've invested into a concept. We'll get to make the full announcement on this, but an average square footage size for us is going to be 1,000 square feet. And it's a concept that we had it running 3 mornings a week this year, and it was doing just over $500,000 on 3 mornings a week.
Wow.
um, Heavy duty EBITDA that's pushing, 50%. We've got to look and think smarter with what we're doing this. And the fact of the matter is, packing 50 bikes into a room or packing 25 reformers, which we're seeing some reformer studios hitting numbers that I've just never even imagined would happen. That may not be the best way, is to assume that more square footage is ideal. Finally, when we look at alternative generations, I'm as interested, to be quite frank, in my parents' generation as I am in Gen Z, and for very different reasons on this one. From Gen Z, I'm fascinated by the fact that obviously they are emotionally tied, I think partly because they've been exposed during the pandemic. They've gone through some ups and downs with some recessions and things like that. Their life has been a relatively, I'll call it, somewhat unstable life on where
That,
this is.
that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, they're a little bit obsessed though with health and wellness. They're looking very much for this internal stability. And with that, we get a chance to really offer some incredible opportunities, some incredible options. They're going to shift the way we market. They already are, whether it's talking about, video-based marketing and how we're leading a lot of top of funnel work with that, because they're driving that. YouTube is their number one social platform. How we're going to utilize that moving forward as a marketing source, when so many studios and quite frankly, health clubs as well have been very meta dependent for their ad flow. Um, Mobile purchasing, recognizing that, if you can't do very simple purchasing, and if we can't use Apple Pay and some of the basics, we've got some real problems. And that's going to come down to our CRMs being willing to embrace this and understand that these are critical for us moving forward. Even
Mm.
basic buy now, pay later options. I mean, I can argue that, if you're going to do a retreat, or you're going to do a major pay in full, or you're going to do a teacher training program, the US population that as an adult has used buy now, pay later options in the last 3 years. It's even more so internationally. So recognizing that we're going to need some shifts in terms of our software capabilities, and a recognition that, hey, this generation is provoking change. We've got to follow it. In terms of concepts, I think Gen Z is looking for more and more intimacy. I think that, the Andrew Hubermans of the world have brought an incredible level of intelligence to what our body can do, what we're looking at. And this is probably the best educated generation about what's possible. They're also looking at their parents who probably didn't take as good of care of themselves, and are saying, wait a second, how do I ensure that that's not what I become? And so I think more and more bespoke options, and I'm shocked at, for everyone who's gone in the low cost route with Gen Z. We've had a couple of concepts that we've taken in the extraordinarily high cost luxury count. Those have been some of our most successful among the Gen Z population, because they're just wanting something more, but something that's uniquely their own. In terms of, let's just say, my parents' generation, We're hitting record breaking numbers of 65-year-olds every year. And by the time we hit 2032, we'll have more 65-year-olds than the more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18. And there's
Well,
two things that I think we've got to shift on this. The first is how are we serving them? Any concept that right now is focused on that 50 plus mark, I am fascinated with how we can add muscle onto people that are historically losing muscle rapidly at this point, but it's such an important piece of this. But secondarily, we're going to see, I think, more and more people that are going to be coming into the labor markets in our industry, retired from maybe one, if not two careers, highly well educated, and saying, hey, I still have something left to give. So I think we're going to see more of that and probably want to embrace what that is going to look like and how we're going to be working amidst a labor force now is going to really span multiple generations. I see that as becoming maybe not 2024's biggest problem, but I see that every year we're seeing more and more and more of that. So, these are just a couple of the things. In addition to that, I touched on the marketing and sales conundrum, but I think that we have a twofold issue in sitting in boutique fitness and probably in fitness across the board. In my mind, we sit at the crossroads of hospitality and service. We've treated ourselves as a service industry this entire time. We're not. I grew up in a phenomenal restaurant family down both sides, with a mother who was the consummate entertainer, and recognizing that the hospitality world and what we're going to need to pull from that is critical these days. Our client journey, our way that we communicate with people, how we truly surprise and delight. So oftentimes the fitness industry has been built on this idea that I want to sell as many memberships and have as few people come as possible.
yeah.
That's not what we said anymore. That doesn't work. That has changed and radically shifted. So that's point number one in sales and marketing. On the marketing front, and point number two, marketing looks radically different. We test last year we tested just over $540,000 in marketing spend, and we're across a myriad of platforms, everything that Meta. So that's going to be Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger ads, all of Google's platforms. So display, search ads, and YouTube. But then starting to poke our heads into things like how are we using LinkedIn, especially for our higher tier personal training studios that are going to be attracting that more corporate client? How are we working with TikTok? TikTok's the only local search engine where it's truly built on a local algorithm. So if I post in Charlottesville, Virginia today, the people most likely to see this are within about a 10 to 20-mile radius of me. So it's built for small businesses for organic content. And while we're seeing a relatively cheap cost per lead, we're still seeing a higher cost per acquisition than on platforms like Meta. So what does this look like going in? And of course, how are we continuing to evolve email marketing, SMS and WhatsApp marketing, and the elephant in the room that everybody's whispering about? How are we using AI to do this really well? Right now, for us, we're using AI primarily as the best marketing analyst I've ever seen, and its ability to roll through and really understand, what data is coming from this and how can we use this better. So
Yeah.
those are just a couple of things.
Yeah, yeah, a few things. The I want to circle back on one or two actually.
Yeah.
So, are you familiar with the Fit Guide and what Jack Thomas is
Yes.
doing?
Yes,
Yeah,
I just sent him some notes on this
yeah, me
stuff.
too, me too. I just sent him some notes, and from the data. So it sounds like you and I got preliminary access to some of the data and the reports, and I was asked to contribute just some thoughts on it overall. So there's two things that stood out to me. Number one was sales, like
It's problem.
conversions. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really bad. And we need to be able, I don't know what that means at the ground level, but at the meta level that we're looking at, it's like, or the macro level, we need to convert sales. We need to be able to ask for the money better and get that sold, right?
Yeah.
The other thing was hospitality in general. And this is what I want to talk to you mostly about is like, we are in the hospitality industry, right? And there's a lot we can learn from, Emirates Airlines or, the Four Seasons, right? Like, do we have to be at that level? Well, no, not necessarily, but there's things we can learn. I mean, even stuff as simple as like the scent of when you walk in, right? Or even just a fresh coat of paint, or how you address people when they walk in the door, how you do it during a class session, whatever it may be. So when you talk about hospitality, I think that's a really key point for people is like, what does that mean to you? Expand on that. And how can we be doing it better?
So hospitality, I think it has different layers to it, but at its core, it's giving someone an experience where they feel extraordinary, and that
Mm,
that really is what it is. And I think, so oftentimes we look to the big players. And I brought in some consultants years ago who had worked with the Ritz-Carlton, they had worked with the Four Seasons. This was probably 2014, 2015 in our business. And I was like, how can we expand? How can we provide something that's even more incredible? And the one takeaway that I really had from this is that it starts with very much the individual perspective and connection. We talk so much on how we're eliminating people. And I think this is where we've got to save the humans and save the human connection on this because, I love the sense and I love having an extraordinary experience when you walk through the door. But really, you can do a lot by having a front desk team member. The most important team member you have, by the way, is sitting at that front desk. If
hmm,
they're the one who stops and says, "Oh my gosh, welcome to our location," and they ensure that you start the sales process there, and they make sure that they use their name, that they're looking up, by the way, who's coming in, and they know that they can recognize them going in. These are simple steps that when you walk through the door your first time in a studio, if someone's like, "Eric, I was waiting for you to come in. We're so delighted. By the way, I've got just a simple bottle of water here for you. Let me just take you for a quick 1 minute tour of the club, of the studio. And by the way, Beth's going to be coming. She's going to be leading your class. She's going to walk you in and get you all set up." That's hospitality at its core. We've taken it to be all these big things that I think are overwhelming. And instead, I look at like the simplest things. I look, quite frankly, at my mom's dinner table.
hmm.
Like my mother used to host dinner parties, I don't know, for 5 people to 50 people multiple times a month at our house. And you never left without feeling like you just belonged and that you were completely welcomed. And if that's what the essence of this is, we're doing it right. And if you can start with your people and start with your team, that's the critical piece of it. And I think that's the part that we're oftentimes missing out on. We don't necessarily have a recruiting pipeline across fitness that's doing very well. The second thing many people are missing is a strong onboarding and training platform and to understand how are you going to guide people to give this level of experience. And it's simpler than we think, but my God, we make it hard.
Yeah. It's, and a lot of things that you mentioned are not monetary investments,
Oh,
right? It's just human to human. It's training, right?
it's
It's having the right
years.
people, having people have the right mindset around what they're doing, people who enjoy the work, right? And I think that's probably a big part of it too, is that as you alluded to earlier, like we don't have a direct career path in fitness very much. I mean, I think probably 10 plus years ago, perhaps we did. Like, you could do a personal trainer for life, right? You could, work up to director level. You could do all kinds of things. And there was a path. And I feel like we've kind of fallen into this gig economy as far as trainers, where it's like, okay, I'll get a certification. I'll do it for summer. Sure. It's like lifeguarding, right? I'll just do that. Right. And then next thing you know, and so I think that's a big problem. I don't know how to address that. I don't know if it's because the pie is not big enough to give a big enough slice to get the talent that we need. That's independent, of course, per studio or per gym. But like, why do you think we're having trouble
Well,
making that career path?
let me go back to your first point.
Sure.
You touched on the sales piece of this before we hit hospitality.
Hmm.
And I actually think this is a root problem of why we're sitting with the career path issue that we have. An average boutique fitness studio converts between 5 and 15% of its introductory packages into long-term memberships. Okay, this is a massive problem. It's a number that
5 to
is,
15.
yeah.
Wow.
And we're talking some major brands that we get to peek inside of that we're like, oh, I mean, it should give you pause for like,
That's horrifying.
it's horrifying. It's the first thing we work on with people. We just did a massive survey and we've got an average 56% conversion rate from intro package to 12-month membership amongst our clients. That's a radical change. That's the difference between having 5 out of every 100 new marketing introductory packages popping through your marketing versus 56. It's a game changer in terms of your revenue. And we have what we know pre-pandemic. We think it's roughly the same now, but it's been hard to track with the post-pandemic fall off. But pre-pandemic, the rolling 13-month attrition rate in boutique fitness, when we would survey this out, it was about 9%, which means 9 out of every 100 people would still be a member of your facility 13 months later. And these are very dangerous numbers for any industry. I mean, I sit right off of University of Virginia's campus. Loads of my friends are professors at Darden. When we talk about this at dinner, they just kind of shake a little bit because they're like, from business school perspective, this doesn't work out. And
Mm-mm.
because of that, we're sitting in this constant revenue roller coaster that I think even the brands that are, doing well and are sitting at, hey, we are a 7-figure brand. They're sitting at a revenue roller coaster. And because their budget is not necessarily focused on revenue driven positions that are growing them, they're running with much leaner profits than they should be running on. And so that leads us to a place where I think a lot of people are afraid to build out a permanent org chart that really is going to allow for those positions. It's let it be easy, where part of our problem with our sales and retention issues is that you're right, we are living in a gig economy. We've got front desk staff that work for 8 hours a week here and 12 hours a week there, and have rarely been properly trained or onboarded. They're happy to sit there and wave people into their favorite studio. We've got instructors that might pop in for 1 or 2 classes a week and can't even, articulate that a teacher training or a major promotion or a major referral or event is going on because they don't even know that's happening. And in many cases, we have no sales management team. So our ROI driven positions just haven't even existed inside of boutique fitness on that org chart. So I think that there is this fear that comes. I mean, I get that fear. When I sit and look at these P&Ls early on, when I start to work with people, I've looked over at this point, probably 3,500, 3,600 P&Ls. I mean, it's scary when you see those numbers. So you've got to almost bite the bullet and say, okay, what revenue driven positions can I put into place first to stabilize? And then what's the long-term sustainable org chart that we're going to have? I mean, no business exists without a sales and marketing department. None.
Yeah.
I mean, and yet we're trying to do this every day in this brand. I think because we're sitting in that fear factor.
It's when I sold my gyms in 17, for a while I coached just one-offs here and there. I would coach gym owners, and the thing I was told this, and then I always pass it on, is like, okay, look around at your staff meeting, and if you can't recognize the salesperson on your team, then guess what?
Yeah.
It's you, right? It's you, and a lot of people don't even recognize that they're the salesperson. So it's like there is no concerted sales efforts, and it's a big problem. I mean, do you see a light at the end of the tunnel? Like, what direction can we go to
Yeah.
make this
Yeah.
to
I mean,
fix
I
this
know
problem? Because it's huge.
it's massive. I think every business needs three things. I had somebody share this with me, and it was a game changer for me. They need the artist who is obsessed with the product. They need an entrepreneur who's obsessed with revenue, and they need an operator who's obsessed with process. And those
Hmm.
can oftentimes overlap and switch amongst even just two people. It might be at some point that you are holding all three of those with you early on. But the fact of the matter is, the process is simpler to put into place. It comes, you alluded to it, but it comes first in the recognition of the fact that you need it. And second, in a decision to make this at the forefront of where you're at. People look at sales as a dirty business. I'm amazed at how many people cringe when we talk about it. And yet, I think sales is simply, helping someone invest in something that's critically important to them. It's a very different ballgame, and we're going to have to paint a very different picture of this. So I think the first thing is recognition. The second thing is going to be to say we're going to prioritize it no matter what. Maybe you don't have the staffing in place to do a sales manager, but my God, you can train every front desk team member to be that person. I mean, we've got studios doing extraordinarily well and running extraordinarily strong profit margins. The other elephant in the room is how many facilities are not profitable right now.
Yep.
But they're running extraordinarily large profit margins off of a front desk team that's properly trained. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's a difference, but this is gonna come down to recognition, process, and training. It's those 3 things. Anyone could have this in place in 60 to 90 days.
Awesome. Awesome. I want to make sure we give a good amount of time to something you've been working on. I know it's a kind of a new, well, you've been working on it, so it's not new, but something that you're going to be releasing out there. And how you are effectively opening studios profitably from day one, right? That's no small feat. So maybe give us some insights on how you're doing that, and yeah, just expand on.
Yeah, yeah. So, when I opened my facilities and when I opened brick and mortar facilities, I guess this would have been like end of 2008, early 2009, 2010, 2011. Bought a facility in 2013, was opening another facility in 2016 when we were selling. When we sold that one before it was opened. We opened every facility profitably. One of our facilities technically opened was profitable about 60 days in, but there was this reassuring moment that hey, we could have such a strong pre-sale and we could have such a strong buildup of founding memberships that we could open our doors and know that every bill was paid, including our own personal salaries, which I think is a
Wow.
critical piece. So in our mastermind, we started just working with more and more clients in 2022. We saw this resurgence of people who were saying, "Hey, I'm going to leap back into the industry." And as we started tracking our numbers in early 2023, we realized that every facility was opening profitably. They were selling out of their founding memberships, and they were consistently on this beautiful path that was really going to put them in my mind, what was a critical place. They had everything done right from day one. And so we started pulling together a team. I would say probably about 6 months ago, and saying, what would an ideal team be? Like almost like your war chest to open a studio profitably. Attorneys, accountants, engineers for build outs, and people who were experts in construction costs, people who were hyper well versed in real estate and were licensed and had dealt in commercial real estate extensively, digital marketing experts, media buyers, and then some sales and operations experts. And we built this lovely team of I guess we have about 9 of us that are have collectively we've opened about 60 of our own locations, and we decided to say, what if we could do everything alongside of you?
Mm,
From building out and ensuring you're in the right market, and that market has the right labor readiness, and that you've got your right avatar there, and that you're going to be able to afford that market, and it's going to make sense on a pro forma to, what is your pricing and product stack going to look like? What are all the ways you're going to make money? Because if the only way you're making money is because you're selling like group classes or small group training, whether it's in the form of memberships or class packs or private session packs or drop ins, you are missing a significant amount of revenue to, really in depth metrics, goals, and projections and budgets rolling out not only through pre sale in the first year, but all the way to year 3, building out full pre-sales, ensuring that we have all the pre-sale pricing and all of the pre-sale marketing, which is a unique beast unto itself. It's its own beast. It gets put away when you're done. When you open studios 2, 3, 4, or 5, you can take it back out and use it again. Choosing the right location, making sure that you can afford that location, understanding what your build out really should be. I mean, we're doing full scale designs in house at this point where we may not be interior decorators, but we can ensure this is going to be the best use of space, and having attorneys who are used to reading fitness leases, who are in there negotiating on your behalf, all the way through to hiring, training your sales team, building your org chart, choosing equipment, making sure it's fairly done. We went through basically every mistake that we saw studio owners make, which we get to see lots of them because we work with lots of existing studios. And we were like, how could we have fixed that then? And we've opened every studio profitably in the last year and a half. That's a feat that I was pretty shocked by and kind of had my jaw dropped. And now we're really rolling this out where we're working with a wide variety of clients on this. Some of them already have 5 to 7 locations. They want to have, all the support that they need across the board. Some of them are coming to us as franchisees that are like, yes, we paid a fair franchise fee. We have the model and modality, but we want an even additional layer of support. And some of them are franchisors who are making leaps into like the US market. And things along those lines that are saying, how are we doing this? But right now we have studios opening in Canada, the US, and Scotland. And we'll have a few more opening in Australia coming soon. So it's a different mentality. But I think we've spent too long saying and having people ask if studios really can be profitable. And it's making the leap to the mindset of this should be one of the most profitable businesses on the planet. Fitness should be. And
Mhm.
how do we get you there?
And when you work with studios on this level, is this something like, do you guys come in and charge a consulting fee? Do you look at equity? Do you
Yeah,
like
we do
how do you arrange it?
crystal straight. I mean, it depends. Here's what I would say. It depends on the project.
Hmm.
90% of 99% of people who are coming in and start your studio profitably, we just do a flat consulting fee. And I think that that's the right thing for 99% of studio owners. We've been offered a lot of projects with equity in them over the years. We've just taken the first one, and I don't see us doing an enormous amount of that just because we recognize the long-term bandwidth. We're going to be selective. When you're approached by this many, it's a blessing and an opportunity for us to be selective where we're going to invest our time and energy. But this is something that, I think for most people, I don't want someone paying me for the next 10 years for what we've done. I want them to also not have that line on their P&L because that can be a line that adds up real fast.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. You know, by the time this interview comes out, probably Ursa will have come and gone.
Yes.
But tell us about what you're doing at Ursa. I know you're going to be on stage. What are some of the topics you're going to be getting into?
Yeah, the state of the boutique fitness industry. So a lot of what we talked about today, but going into even more detail on, especially what are we seeing? How are people buying? What are they buying? What is that doing for long-term revenue? And when we have people that are using a facility potentially differently than they did, especially pre-pandemic, what are some of the other ancillary services and revenue sources that we need to be looking at? I think that product stack that I alluded to before is something that really needs to be more developed in our industry. Going into a lot more depth on marketing and how we're utilizing AI there. In fact, we filmed a really great training. So if you're there live, we're gonna give everyone a nice little link. I realized I couldn't put it all in there, but we wanted to make sure people had a link to really dive in and see how we're using it because I think AI can be a great junior copywriter, it can be a great junior graphic designer, it can be an excellent analyst for you. But the fact of the matter is, we're using it very differently than what I typically see, which is, hey, I'm going to put in 3 lines into Chat GPT and hope it gives me what I want. It's a different level of where this can be. So it's understanding that this is a tool that can very much level up your business. It can provide an enormous amount of support for $30 or less a month, but it does mean you're going to have to take the time to really understand and know it just a little bit better. So I'm excited. I as I was finishing my presentation a couple of weeks ago and we were looking at all these numbers coming in, the most excited thing was, hey, we're looking a lot at profitability. This is a year we're going to spend a lot of time talking about profitability. And I'm really excited by what we're able to share on what's really been the difference between studios that are enormously profitable, that are making giant leaps ahead. What have been the difference between those and everyone else?
Oh, that's gonna be great. Yeah, I hope I can make it. I'm gonna run around doing interviews, all kinds of stuff, but
That's next.
I'm gonna carve that one out for sure. Let's your podcast. I mean, you do the Business of Boutique Fitness podcast, right?
Yeah.
Over at last time I checked, 597 episodes, uh,
No.
over 1 million downloads. So tell us about the podcast, and because people listen to one podcast and listen to seven, so maybe this should
Yeah.
be another one for people here to listen to.
Yeah, I just filmed the 600th episode, which is just
Wow,
wild. I know, it's crazy.
congrats!
Crazy. It felt a little bit shocking considering I filmed the first one in my mother's dining room table when I was home visiting in New Orleans. It feels a little weird.
Yeah.
But no, it's really everything you need to know about the industry from, in-depth region-wide downloads. We just had, our team who's based in the UK, discussing, what is the industry looking like in very specific markets, whether it's Europe, the UK, the Middle East, to very specific practical measures. Like, what are we seeing when we're dealing with marketing? What are the practical steps in the client journey? What are shifts and responses that we're seeing in the sales process? How do you build referrals? How do you choose independent contractors versus employees? What do all the bright org charts look like? I think it's not only the high level overview and some amazing interviews with some incredible people, but it's also like really practical. This is what we're seeing today. Steps and ideas that you can implement into your studios and ideally probably beyond across the fitness industry.
Yeah, right on, right on. Last question I always ask is, as an industry, as a community, how can we help you, Lisa? What would you like to hear from people about?
Oh my gosh, I love data. That's gonna sound like a strange thing, but
No, not
the more
really.
we share what's really happening from a numerical perspective, the more we can help. We're always trying to get to the root of where the biggest problems are, and we've got a team that's just dedicated problem solvers. They're not even members of our team that are not even coaches, that are not even not even working client facing, yet they're working with client data to see how do we solve some of the biggest issues in our industry. And the more we know of what's really happening, the better off we are. And so that to me, it's always the greatest piece is to really share, the nitty gritty of what's happening, behind your doors. On top of it, you know, come and say hi to me if you're at URSA or any of these other events. I'm a Southern girl. I like big hugs and high fives and all of those things. So don't shy away. Come say hi because that's the best way you can help me help,
Mm,
help me get to know all of y'all as I see you at more and more events this next year.
awesome, awesome. Well, I look forward to meeting you in person. And where would you like people to go? People are listening. What would you like them to do
Oh
next?
gosh. Okay, so they can go to Instagram, that's Studio Grow Co. Come find me on LinkedIn. That's where I actually do
Mhm.
most of my work. Lisa Kuecker. I know it's the worst last name in the whole wide world. So Eric, I'm going to rake you to put a link in there so people can actually get that spelling without having to listen to this on rewind and come say hi on LinkedIn. And of course, we're going to be at a lot of big events over the next couple of months. We're going to be in Singapore with Beyond Active
Cool.
and in New York with Beyond Active. So please come and say hello in person.
Right on. Well, I will definitely see you in a few weeks. And thank you so much for joining me. I love the work you're doing. Very valuable insights. You have a really nice viewpoint on everything that's going on, and you're actually doing it, right? Like you're in the trenches. And we can talk about next time the thing that you're doing now that we can talk about a whole lot. But it looks really exciting, and I know that's such a clandestine ending to this. But thank you for joining me, Lazel Gemin, Lisa Keeker.
Thanks, y'all.